For the most talented analytical minds, the path to success is usually paved with logic, data, and technical precision. But a strange thing happens when you are promoted into leadership. Suddenly, the systems you have mastered no longer apply. You find yourself in a world of constant change, facing demands you weren't trained for. You might find yourself focusing on only one domain while others fall apart, or worse, feeling disconnected and bitter towards a role you once aspired to. According to our guest today, Dalmo Cirne, many analytical people fail in management not because of lack of competence, but because of a lack of preparedness. Management isn't a vague art form, it is a creative craft that requires objective criteria, effectiveness, and efficiency. Today, we sit down with Dalmo Cirne, author of the Four Streams of Leadership, to discuss how you can refactor your career and move from a frustrated specialist to an overachiever leader. Thank you, Dalmo, for being with us today.
Thank you, Ivan. This was a magnificent introduction. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I am excited to be here for our conversation today.
Dalmo, I have a question. I know about your experience. You have spent like 20 years in between technology and leadership positions. At what point did you realize that technical prowess alone wouldn't be enough to get the job done when you progress in your career?
It's interesting when you have the chance to work on both large companies and small companies like startups, and you see different stages of those companies. And some lessons you learn on startups is once they start experiencing some rapid growth, you need to still like get the projects forward, the number of features, they escalate very fast. At some point, you realize that it doesn't matter what you want to do or how good you are at doing the things you're trying to do. You can't do alone. You need help. You need people with you aligned on the mission and helping you to do that. But you can't just go and tell people, hey, here's what to do, go and do it. It doesn't end well, right? People don't like being told what to do. Leadership is more about communicating. Here's what needs to be done. Let's figure out the best way of doing that. That's when it hit for me, and I was in the midst of that growth in a smaller company, and we needed to do more. We needed more people to do that, and I had to learn, as they say, is baptism by fire, right? I had to figure out, okay, today I'm an engineer, tomorrow I'm no longer, and what do I do, right? That's the challenges and how I started my transition into leadership and management.
I remember back in my days, I was a university student and I was studying engineering. The thing is that when I got into the into the corporate world, I felt a little bit naked because I hadn't built all these human skills to interact. And you know what? I have to be sincere. When you are an engineer, you have a brain that you believe that you know everything and that you can have a model about every single interaction, which is in reality is not true. And it's disappointing that it doesn't work like mathematics, that you can put a model on that. So, and my question is, why is it so challenging for people with an analytical mind to get these skills to understand one that you need them and how to practice? Why is it so challenging, specifically for geeks like me?
I would not say it is challenging. Perhaps it's because you haven't considered the broader problem, right? Um, Not long ago, I wrote an essay uh, pretty much talking about frameworks that, like having a model or having a plan until sharks fly. And it was a joke about that movie Sharknado. And the point
Oh,
is, oh,
yes.
can you create a model that is good for everything? Do I have to start wearing a chain link suit because just in case sharks are flying and they try to come in? But the point is, we create models not because models are bad. We create models because we want to establish reproducible results. And for most circumstances, that is true, right? For the average use case, the model can replicate that and you can obtain reproducible results. But the model it will not work as you start, the more you deviate from the typical use case or the mean use case, the more you approach the extremities, more likely for the model to fail.
Mm,
The thing is, we tend to resist the need to say, oh, we have to treat exceptions as exceptions. We try to fit the exceptions in the model. Now you have that model that grows ever more and becomes a monstrosity rather than a model, where a better approach would have been to, okay, the model is here, it's going to cover majority of the cases. When an exception happens, we treat that as an exception and move on. If the exception happens very often, by definition, is not an exception. You
mm,
have to come up with a model for that use case. Now you have two models, right? One for uh, the typical case. Now we have a separate model for that other use case. And then you continue treating the exceptions as exceptions. That is a more effective way of doing things. Otherwise, you're going to end up creating a procedure, like spend 6 months working on this elaborate framework to solve a procedure that would have taken 6 minutes to solve, and then you move on, right? Processes are not bad in themselves. The insistence of insisting on the models and not handling the exceptions for what they are, that may be a better approach, a better understanding of the bigger problem.
mm. When you started writing your book, so if we are saying models are not applicable as such in real life, how did you structure your book? Because your book is called The Four Streams of Leadership. When I read the name streams, I think of water, of a flow. I think
Exactly.
about agility. So the structure of your four streams, is it more of a model or more of a principles in order for you to try validate and do some type of circuit validation around each of the principles?
Yes, this is a funny way of answering to it's all of the above. Let me give you a little more context to understand why the streams, right? We have a constant flow of tasks and activities coming our way, and they are going into different directions. Like a perennial river that is constantly flowing, that's why I call them the four streams. And the streams are the reservoir, which is yourself. That's where it all begins.
Mm,
Downstream, where you're managing your team, your projects, operations. Upstream, where you are managing your managers. You're not telling them what to do, but there's a lot of communication that has to happen over there. And Sidestream, where you are working together with your peers, like product managers and legal team and sales team and marketing and so on. Now, in terms of a framework to work with all those cases and the specific discussion we just had about exceptions and frameworks and how does it fit, I have that very discussion in the book itself. I have been thinking about that problem for a while. The principles is what brings you the explanatory knowledge. Is I understand what needs to be done, and I created a process. The reason to create a process, let's open a parenthesis over here. The reason to create a process is something that happens with a certain frequency, or you don't want to wing it every time, and you want to obtain reproducible results, right? We all talk about when the assembly line first came up and how to do it. And the intention over there was not to create an assembly line. The intention over there was to have automobiles that were reliable. It was always pretty much the same. You could have the same product. So if you bought an automobile and I bought an automobile, it would be kind of like the same one, rather than you get one that works, everything is beautiful, and I got one and it is a lemon, right? It's just uh, a rust bucket. To avoid that problem, we establish processes to obtain reproducible results. But what is more important, it's not the process is the shortcut. What's more important, there's a layer beneath that, which is explanatory knowledge. And the explanatory knowledge is, do you know what is being done? What is uh, the objective? Why you're doing this? Knowing the explanatory knowledge for the situation, you can handle, you can deal with the exceptions. So it is both a framework and is both thinking about the principles of what constitutes leadership management. So you can understand what it is, but you also have the shortcuts. If you need to come up with explanatory knowledge and deal with every single situation on a case by case basis, you are not going to be able to run a business, right? Because everything you have to take an immense amount of time just to do that particular task at the expense of all the other tasks you have to do. So to some of them, you have to establish that process. It's kind of like a shortcut for obtaining consistent results. And then you deal with the exceptions.
Hmm. Crazy. When you are talking, my brain automatically goes back to what I know. A little bit of science and make me think about the duality of light. Light can be a particle, light can be a wave. So there is a duality that explains all of the cases that we see in nature. And similarly, your model is a framework, and it is also like a model.
Yeah, and even if we go back to principles of engineering, imagine a surface, right? And you have the tensile forces and all that. For the immense majority of the surface, it's very easy to handle with that. But as you get to the edges, then it becomes incredibly complicated, right? So the structure isn't the whole science is, how do I deal with the edges? And that's where you spend majority of your time. But can you come up with a framework for the edges? And you say, okay, if something happens in the middle, we deal with that later, and so on, right? So even in science and structures, you can see that apply.
One of the most interesting parts that I found that is very often forgotten in leadership models is what you call the reservoir. So focus on managing oneself. Uh, I I haven't seen it very often in books, but I have heard people talking about it. I remember, I don't know if it was a TED Talk or just an interview from a guy, the founder of Better Up being like an online coaching service that is not well known in Europe, by the way, but it is more in the United States. And Alexis Robichaud is explaining that everything starts with self-awareness or managing oneself instead of just going and managing other people without knowing yourself. So for an analytical mind who is used to debugging systems, what are the most common bugs they encounter in their own leadership mindset on how they perceive the world?
Yeah. One of the things that happen is, imagine you land in a different country from the one you're familiar with, right? So whichever, and the listeners can all imagine whichever country you are right now, imagine a country that is very different from yours, different language, different alphabet, different. Now imagine yourself in that place. You decided to take a vacation and you went to spend a week in that place, right? Everything is unfamiliar, right? The first sensation you're going to feel is I'm lost. I don't know how to read. I can't get instructions. Where am I supposed to go? And are red lights really red or green lights? There are all those things in your mind because you are feeling lost. And that allows us to make and draw a parallel to us going, for example, from an individual contributor, from an engineer into management. The first thing that happens is you're going to be feeling lost. Why? Your identity changed, right? You used to be an expert on something, and now you are in a field where, hey, the skills you need are different. What you need to do is different, right? You used to oversee technology or a process or something, and you were creating, and now you're no longer, right? You're overseeing and you're doing different things. Uh, Even the attachment to people changes because as an individual contributor, as an engineer, you have a relationship with peers next to you. Even if you change to a different company, or if you remain in the same company, it doesn't matter. But the way that you relate with the people on the team, that will change as well, because inevitably there will be a hierarchical structure over there, right? The meaning you used to derive from work is different. It used to be meaning from completing tasks and building things and seeing products there. Now your meaning has derived from something else. So basically, the ground underneath your feet shifted and you need to adapt. But not being aware that those shifts are taking place puts you in a position where your first reaction is of refutal, right? You're going to be angry, you're going to be rebuffing. So being aware that those changes will take place, and the same way that a trip to a foreign land from yours can be very pleasant, and you go there and say, oh, I went to place X, Y, and Z, the language is totally different, but then I end up meeting this person and they explained it to me, it was wonderful, I created new friends. So even though you landed in a different place, you can have a great experience, right? You have to be open. But the difference between the two cases is in the first case of the trip, you planned, you intended to go there, and you were expecting things to be different. But sometimes with the changing jobs from engineer or individual contributor into management, you try to bring your reality with you rather than, hey, I'm walking into a new reality. How do we adapt to it? Right. So I think that is one of the first realizations you have in order to be the leader, be the manager you can become.
I love this, the way you describe it, bringing your own reality with you to the new level. And it happens very often, and I have often observed that we come with assumptions. We either believe sometimes that we know how to handle that situation, and we don't doubt because as engineers, we tend to believe that we are more clever than the average. I don't know if you have noticed that story, but my wife always tells me that, by the way. So I tend to believe her. We come with assumptions that might be wrong, and we don't adapt to the new situation, and that is often I have seen it with friends and with myself.
But it's not only with engineers. Let's talk about any sports fan, right? You are
You're right.
sitting in your armchair and you're watching the TV and the player is playing and say, damn, how did you do that? If I was there, I would have done it differently. And it's like, really, would you? Right? So it's not just engineers. It's a human trait, right? Because if it's true for engineers, true for sports fans, true for other people, it's universally true.
You're right, Dalmo. In fact, I didn't think about it, but now I see myself saying stuff while my daughter is playing ice hockey, and I know what I say, and sometimes it's horrible. in in your book, coming back to the approach or the system that you have developed in your book, in the downstream flow, you manage three dimensions: teams, projects, and operations. Uh, how would you say an analytical mind can avoid the trap of focusing only on the project domain while neglecting the human team part of the business?
The first thing to do is assembling the team. Sometimes the team will be assembled for you,
Mm.
but sometimes you're going to assemble the team. Most of the time, you find in between. If you stay on the job long enough, you're going to interview the people to do that. Irrespective of the situation where you find in the spectrum, right? Since we were talking about sports, let's make an analogy to sports and bring to our reality. Um, in collective sports, you have people playing different positions on the field. If it's hockey or soccer, we call soccer in the US, or rugby, or you pick the sport, right? If everyone is a goalkeeper, you're not going to score any goals, right? If everyone is a forwarder, well, the goal is going to be open. And so there has to be that balance over there. You know that there cannot be everyone on the team playing the same role. There will be different roles. Now let's bring back to our reality of working. I like to say that there are three fundamental roles, three fundamental profiles of people you want to bring to your team. The first one is the visionary. Those are the people who can understand the problem, see in the abstract, and draw a line and say, there's a product over here, there's something we can build in there. And the same way, like a goalkeeper, you don't have five goalkeepers, you have one over there. You don't need many visionaries. They would bicker with each other because I'm more visionary than you, and so on. So you don't need many of them. Perhaps you need two or three because people need to go on vacations and they need time off and whichever reason, right? But you don't need many visionaries. The second one are the implementers
Mm.
that you need most of them. Those are the ones who say, okay, I can get that concept that was defined by the visionary and implement that. I know how to build this, right? So we can go from the blueprint, from the specs, and I know how to transform that into a product. And you need a lot more of those people on the team. The thing is, the people who like to implement things, they are also drawn to new ideas as they are approaching the finish line and they say, oh, there's a new idea, a new shiny object over there. Let's go and start implementing that one. And you end up with 10 projects that are 90% finished, and none of them you can bring to customers, right? So there's not a lot of value created over there. That leads us to the third core profile, which is the closer, who's the forwarder, right? The person who is not satisfied until the product is past the finish line. That's the person who put a bow on top and say, hey, okay, it's finished. And the person is not going to be distracted by anything else. Also, you don't need a lot of forwarders, but you need some of them, more than visionaries, less than the implementers. You need those. So with those three profiles on the team, you have the people necessary to conceive the product, implement the product, and push that product across the finish line, right? even if the team was assembled for you, you can start seeing those types of personality, those kinds of traits on specific people. And you don't have a person that is purely a visionary or purely a forwarder or purely an implementer. Everyone has traits of all of them, and you end up having to do a little bit of all of them. But some people have predominantly a certain trait, right? And you say, okay, you may be a visionary, but you're still working on things until the end, right? And you're implementer, but you may come up with an epiphany and come up with a new product and so on. So that is the first step in considering the human element on the team. And you know that it is an engineering process, right? You're assembling the team with that framework in mind. Again, I'm not giving a specific lesson on how to choose those people, but saying, hey, broadly speaking, you want those kinds of traits on your team. See how you assemble the team, either if the team was already assembled for you and you can identify people and assign roles, or if you assemble the team, as you interview, look for those people with traits that you are in need to fill the team, right? But before we complete this, there is one final element that is after the team is complete or assembled, is the longevity of the team, right? You have a thing called the burnout. You have a thing called uh, either underwork or overwork. And
Mm.
how can you have a sustainable productivity velocity? If you're moving too fast, you can do that for a while. You end up going to burnout. If you're moving too slow, well, people will be bored, but that's the least of your problems. The least of the bigger problem will be you are not going to be putting products over there in time for the
Mm.
company to be successful with those products. The competition will come and eat your lunch. You may not even have a department or a company at the end of the day. So you have to find that sweet spot where you're not going too fast, you're not going too slow, you're just going at the right speed. And there's not a correct speed, right? This usually goes with ebbs and flows, with a little bit fast, a little bit slower. You're going, there's that fluctuation, but you don't want your fluctuation to be like a roller coaster that you have like high peaks and low troughs, and that you're gonna be, your stomach is gonna feel sick, right? So you want that fluctuation to be gentle. It will happen, it's inevitable, but you don't want to be with the sensation that you're riding on a roller coaster,
Mm.
right? So I think those are the two core elements on considering the people on your team.
Dalmo, I have often observed that the manager very often believes that he should be the only person to be the visionary. When I listen to you, I understand that no, in the team there could be several visionaries, as long as it's not the full team that is a bunch of visionaries who are not implementing anything. So what you're saying is that a manager can be considered as a visionary if he wishes, but it's better to have a couple of other people in the team that can supplement with more vision on what is being done. Is that correct?
Yes, and I would add to what you said, the manager can be any of the roles. A manager could be one of those forwarders, that the one who actually pushes across the finish line, who
Mm.
stays there and say, hey folks, we're not done until we're done, and keep the team engaged before switching to the next project, or could be the visionary. So the manager is part of the team and will play one of those roles, even though everyone plays all the roles, but the manager will have more affinity to one of those roles. So the manager is not excluded from those roles, it's included in those.
Mm. Now, if we move to the next stream, the upstream, which is a very tricky one, it's about supporting senior management through effective communication and alignment. What is the API or the interface that we need to create for communicating complex technical data to non-technical upper management, which happens very often, by the way?
Yeah. before we go there, let's get an example of we were talking about assembly lines in automobiles. Let's go back to an automobile, right? So assuming you have a car, you go in there, you turn the car on, you grab the steering wheel, and you start driving it. Did it happen? Does it have a combustion engine? Is it an electric vehicle? Do we know everything that is happening over there? Is it necessary, or we just need to know how to drive the car, right? So we can start making that abstraction of people who are non-technical getting information and still being able to do their job. They have to have some domain knowledge, otherwise they would not be in that managed position. But it doesn't have to be specific technical knowledge, but they must have some domain knowledge. So in terms of communication is what even is the information you want to communicate and how to communicate, right? Is it just going to be spoken? Is it going to be written? Is it going to be how are you going to communicate and what information? One shortcut that you have for communicating information is with metrics, right? You usually come up with a set of performance indicators and so on. But a little while ago, there was this gentleman called Charlie Goodhart, and he came up with the Goodhart law that says when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure,
Mm.
right? Imagine that you have a cupcake factory and you're producing them, and then people say, oh no, cupcakes now are out of fashion. They're too many calories and sugar, and people are not eating cupcakes anymore. But still, you have the metric. You have to produce 1,000 cupcakes a day. Say, hey, why are we doing this? People are not eating. No, but we have that metric. You have to produce 1,000 cupcakes a day. So it stopped being a good metric, right? So it is important to create those performance indicators because you have to have some shortcuts to read the situation, but you cannot rely purely on those matches, and you have to evaluate them every now and then. Reevaluate those metrics to see if they still make sense, right? Another instrument is you are doing the work, implementing products and so on, and you need to communicate with management what you're doing. They are not participating on a day-to-day, but they still need to be aware. A great way of doing this is to schedule periodical presentations, right? You come up, not every week, that's too much. Perhaps every milestone, you say, hey, let's put together a couple of slides. If you go beyond single digit number of slides, you have too many. You have to be like 3, 4 slides just to give like a highlight of what you're doing, what has been done. Then you jump to a demo and say, here's what has been done. If it was a physical product, try to show the prototype. If it was a software product, if it was a service, you show what has changed in that period, the progress that was made, because they your managers, they will have a level of visibility of the situation that is different than yours. For example, you will know about the specific technical aspect of that, but the manager may know about how it's going to go to market, and you may not know, right? So they need to know, okay, this new features, this is how it works, and they can make the connection and say, oh, this can be used by that kind of customers, and here's how I'm going to bring that to market. And they will be working with the sales team on how to demo and things like that. So the communication needs to happen because you want to give enough information and enough gut feeling about the situation to your managers to help them make good decisions, because
Yep.
they will make a decision one way or another. If you provide them with everything you can in terms of gut feeling, circumstances, data, they will consider that, and they will have a perspective that you don't have, right? You have the nitty-gritty details, they have the bigger picture,
Mhm.
and they complement each other. And those presentations are also a great way to help those communications go back and forth. And you have in between presentations, status reports that you can write, just a few bullet points. You don't want to write a very long status report, because if you write something long and no one reads,
What's the
all your
point?
work was in vain.
Yeah.
So you want to write something that is going to be read. If you put 4 or 5 bullet points in one quick message, can be on your internal messaging application or on email, put 4 or 5 bullet points. Here's the gist of the situation. It's going to be read, right? If the person has a question, they will say, hey, how about bullet 3? Tell me more about that point. Then you can go and
Mm,
go to town, right? You explain the whole thing because they want to know more, but otherwise they want only need to know the big picture.
mm,
Right? So
mm.
those are effective techniques and effective ways of communicating.
I remember back in the days, in the past 20 years ago, when you had a project, you had to write like 5 pages of what happened on the about the status report, and it doesn't make sense. Not that how the way you mention it is not about selling how much effort and sweat you have put during the project, but about picking up the information that is going to help you that this project is successful. So thinking about what do you need from them in order that the project is a success. So you feed them with information that is going where you're going to receive a feedback, or you're going to receive some new information to make it successful, instead of selling all the efforts that you have done. That's why we ended up with 5 pages of of reports that nobody was reading, simply.
Exactly. 5 pages that go into the dustbin of history because no one reads them.
Mm. I see more and more companies. Probably, well, according to one of the studies that I have read maybe 6 months ago, more than half of the companies are using agile methodology, which means that instead of doing a big project, big ass project like in the 2000s where it was lasting 1 year and a half, you are talking about mini sprints where it is about 2 weeks or 1 month of a sprint, and then you have to provide like features that to talk about it. So, and there is a continuous progress, and that allows also a more continuous communication with less boredom that you are discussing about the project in the middle, because you are talking about a specific milestone that are visible for anyone to be seen. So that helps a little bit the way that we have progress in terms of managing projects in sprints. Is it's sprints helping uh, the communication? What do you think about it, Dalmo?
So a moment ago, we were talking about explanatory knowledge, right? And why? So even why do we have agile or waterfall? And people say this methodology is better than the other method. But what is the underlying principle? Understanding that will help us make a better choice. So the whole thing exists because in any process, you need a feedback mechanism for error correction. For example, imagine that we are driving a car, or flying an airplane, or sailing a boat. It's constantly changing directions, right? If you're driving a car, you have a lane for your car. You may be deviating the lane a little bit and you correct the steering wheel back on your lane, but you're constantly making those micro adjustments. And you have the feedback either from the road in front of you, the compass on an airplane, or GPS that you may be using. Um, so that mechanism of constant error correction is necessary for you to get to where you want to go, right? The proposal of Agile or Scrum or Waterfall is, can we have more touch points where we can evaluate the situation and we correct errors
Yeah.
more quickly and to get to where we want to go? Right? If you have a project that is going to last 2 days, you can do waterfall, you can do whatever. It doesn't make a difference.
Exactly.
days and you're iterating, you kind of know exactly where you want to go, and there's not a lot to be done. If longer projects, then things start making a difference. But the explanatory knowledge, the underlying principle is we need an effective mechanism to give us feedback to allow us to make error corrections. That's why in the sprints, you have feedback or retrospective of the sprint and what did we do right, what did we do wrong, is it going in the right direction, do we need to adapt this, was there a focus group and did they give a good feedback on the feature, should be blue or orange, or so there are infinite questions. If you wait until the end of the project to ask them, that may be too late. So instead of siding with methodology A, B, or C, understand what are you trying to accomplish over there, what the shortcut of the methodology is giving to you, and you say, okay, here's the level of error correction that I need and the feedback that I need, what best serves me, right? That is a better approach.
Mm, Dalmo, I'm very curious. I couldn't avoid seeing that you have a guitar in the left side of you.
Oh yeah.
Tell me, what type of music do you play?
I play the type of music that gets me to embarrass myself the least.
Okay, but you have to tell me, is it more into rock or more a little bit something that from I don't know, some folkloric Americans have some folk country music. What do you play?
Yeah. Now it's more on the old-fashioned rock and roll.
Great. I would not embarrass you and ask you to play in front of the audience. No, I will not do that, Dalmo.
That would be cruel.
Tell me, for analytical mind listening today who feels disconnected or even bitter towards their current management role, what is the one quick lesson from your book that they can apply tomorrow morning and that is going to have impact in their lives?
So everyone talks about working smarter, not harder,
Mm,
right? What does it even mean, right? Oh, work smart. Like, yeah, what do you mean by that? So imagine a computer processor like a CPU,
mm,
right? The way it works, it has to get instructions that are in the computer memory, and they have to bring those instructions either from uh, disk or to RAM memory, and they have to put in a pipeline of instructions. And if those are the correct instructions to execute, it goes and does. If not, they have to wipe the whole cache and fetch new instructions, put over there, which can be unproductive. Instead, if you have all the right instructions lined up, the processor just goes there and gets one instruction after another, and that's when the computer works at its peak performance. How do we translate that to our reality, to our world? Our teams, they work from a backlog, and there will be tasks on that backlog. Some tasks will be allocated for this sprint or next sprint, or even if it's waterfall, you have the milestones where you're going to be working on those tasks. But what happens is, how often do we see tasks that are on the backlog, but they are not ready to be implemented because it lacks information, it doesn't have all the details needed. So whomever picks that task has to go and chase people and ask more questions, how you do this. They became less productive. So let's try to be realistic and do a back of the envelope calculation over here. Imagine that you have so no, we're not imagine. We do have 52 weeks in a year. Of those 52 weeks, let's say you have 40 productive weeks in a year, right? The others you are on vacation, you may have like some medical situations. Let's say on average you have a 40 weeks of solid work. And just for the sake of this conversation, each person completes one task per week. Now we're talking about 40 tasks per person per year. If you have better tasks that are ready to be executed and people can just pick them from the backlog and execute them, and they gain a productivity of like 10%. Now from 40, you have 44 tasks being completed in 1 year
Mm.
without having to ask anyone to work harder or longer or smart. No, they just say, hey, the tasks are now ready to go. Here's the pipeline from the backlog. You pick the task, you execute, and so on. Now, what if you are a startup company? That gain of productivity can mean that you are the winner in the race you're in to sell your product to customers because you're going to have more features, better features, new bells and whistles, and so on. If you are an incumbent company, all right, that may mean, hey, my product can have a longer shelf life and I'm adding more features and so on. You have more productivity from the team without going back to the sustainable productivity velocity, right? Without burning your team out, you have that gain in performance. So working on your backlog and the readiness of the tasks on the backlog would allow your team to operate at peak productivity without having to ask anyone to work any harder or smarter or longer. Or so that is a task you can start applying today, right?
That's a great one and a very valid one. Dalmo, how can people reach you out if they want to have a chat about leadership, understand a little bit more your system to make leaders overachievers? How, how can they reach you out? What is the best way?
I would love to invite everyone to visit my website. It's dalmocirne.com. It's spelled DALMOCIRNE.com. And there you can find links to my social networks. You can find several essays I have written, links to buy the book. You can also schedule a conversation with me. There's a very convenient place. You just go there, pick a time, schedule a conversation with me. Or if you're not ready for a conversation, but you want to just shoot me a note, there's a form over there. You can send me a message. I reply to all messages. So the best place to go, dalmocirne.com, and I talk to everyone.
Very efficient. So I will put the link to your website. Remember that in the website you will also find, and I also will put it the link directly to read about the book, The Four Streams of Leadership, which is, I think, something that many of us who have been into these struggles of being purely analytical and suddenly we get promoted and we are not really ready, it's good to have someone who speaks our language so that we can structure better and get better prepared. Thank you very much, Dalma, for this beautiful episode. Thank you.
This was a fantastic conversation. Thank you for having me, Ivan.
And next time I will ask you to play the guitar because it has been poking me in my eye.
Next time I'll move it out of vision.
Thank you, Dalmo.